As true crimers, it is important that we understand the criminal justice system, the crime rates, and how they are changing. Hey everybody, welcome to the True Crime Squad. I'm Kristi Brower here with my sister, co-host, and partner in all things crime, Katie Weaver. Hey Katie.
Hello.
How's it going?
It's going pretty good. I somehow managed to sleep until after 9 today. That's just
Wow.
unheard of in this house. It's so cold, even the piggies didn't want to get up and have breakfast and go outside.
Right? No one wants to be up in this. Oof.
It was -5 when I got up.
Yeah, we're hitting the sub-zeros, guys. That sucks, man. And I know, like, people in Wisconsin and Midwest are like, oh, fuck off, because it's way colder there. But we're just getting started. January is usually our worst month for the super colds, and it's coming. You can sure feel it.
Yeah. Well, yesterday, our older Chihuahua Rico, who's got these really long, skinny, tiny legs and gets really cold, went out to go potty and then couldn't come back in. He was too cold and sat in the snow and screamed and cried until one of my daughters ran out and saved him.
Oh no.
Yeah, it's
Poor
that
Rico.
season.
Yes.
Yeah. Although he's going to protest loudly, he's going to have to just start wearing a sweater today.
Yeah, he definitely.
And probably
You guys, if you could see Rico, he is the funny. He looks like a baby kangaroo.
He really
Like
does.
those legs. He's so funny and cute. But yeah, doesn't he occasionally like tip over in the snow and then he can't move? He just
That's what he
freezes
did.
in
Yeah, and
place.
screamed and bawled till she ran and saved him. Yeah.
Poor little Rico. Life is
Last time he
tough.
did that, I ran out in my bare feet to save him. That's been a few years ago. I was hoping we were over that, but I guess
Yeah.
not.
Like maybe no. Well, you have 2 of your college kids home and another one coming in a couple of days.
Yeah, it's going to be a busy week at my house. Yeah, everybody home and yeah, I have a lot that I need to them to help me. I'm kind of at that age now that I'm like, oh, when the kids get home, maybe they can help us do that. They're probably like, God damn it, we just want to lay on the couch. Like,
Oh, we do it, and my son lives with us, but we're like, well, we'll take care of that when Mike gets home.
Yeah, yeah.
Like, hey, we fed and clothed you and raised you as a child. You are now obligated to help us with stuff that we can't do anymore.
And you are by far stronger than we are at this point, so
Yeah.
sometimes we just need you to do stuff. Yeah.
Yes, we do.
Micah
Yes, we
kind of
do.
counts on it, our son. He'll call me before it's even he comes home and be like,
Mhm.
"So what are you guys going to need me to help you with?"
It's
He's
cute
more
because he will help. He'll come help us. He'll go
yeah.
help our other sister Kara. Like
hmm
he's prepped for it, which I think is really cute.
Yeah. But it's cute or sad, right? That we've prepped him to know that when you come home, we will definitely need you to do things. But
I think it's cool that he thinks
however,
of it.
he's also bringing his girlfriend home, which is the first time we've had
Mm.
a significant other home for a holiday like this. And
Mhm.
we've never met her before. So we're super excited to get to meet her. And, uh, you know, I bought her quite a few Christmas gifts so that she'd have things to open on Christmas morning along with the rest of us. And I've never met her. So I hope I did well, but it's going to be an
Mhm.
interesting holiday for us, I think. But yeah, it's
Yeah,
exciting. It's going to
it
be
is.
fun.
That's cool. Very cool.
Yeah.
Well, this is the last Monday that we will have an episode in season 3.
Yeah.
We're off all of next week. We're taking a week off. I can't believe we're about to start season 4
Yeah,
of this podcast. That is wild. Wild to me.
it is.
But it's real. It's true.
Mhm.
And this episode is a little different than what we normally do. But we wanted to, at the end of this year, talk about US crime stats because we cover mostly United States cases, although
Mhm.
we do cover some foreign ones as well. Um, I don't mean foreign, that's a terrible word. I mean like international cases. Good Lord.
There you go.
Um,
Foreigners, mother nations.
however,
Yeah.
that
No, it's not that.
was very redneck of you. Good job. Um,
No.
yeah. We are from Idaho. Well, I mean, it sneaks in every once in a while, and you're like, "Oh my god, did I just say that?" Uh, anyway, as true crimers, and I will say that true crime has taken a real hit lately.
Yeah,
That we all are just, romanticizing serial killers and all this stuff, and that in general that is not true.
and
There's
spreading crime and misinformation and
yes, and
doxing
unfortunately
people and
that
yeah.
has happened some
Mhm.
recently, and we take a very different view of true crime. We see ourselves as part of the solution, not creating more problems, and
At
we
least we want to. Yeah.
want to be a source of education. We want to be a source of support of communities and victims and their families, and support of law enforcement, and also calling out law enforcement if they're not, doing what they should be doing. But
Yeah.
a big part of it is understanding the system, understanding as much as we can about crime. Why does it happen? How is it happening? Who is it happening to? Who is doing it? Those kinds of things.
Mhm.
And we put a lot of emphasis on those parts of true crime and not
Yeah.
so much on the sensationalizing of things. So I wanted to do a show about crime statistics in the US. What does crime look like in the US?
Mhm.
Uh, which is a really complicated question.
Yeah.
Honestly, it's a very complicated question. We have somewhere in the 18,000 uh, police and sheriff's departments and state police in this country. So that's a lot.
Mhm.
Trying to get crime stats from all of them is very hard. They don't all report. Getting accurate reporting, we get it from some, not from everyone.
Yeah.
And trying to get a feel for, is crime worse or better? Why? What's happening with it? What's happening with it around race?
Mhm.
There are a lot of questions. And a big change happened in 2015. The FBI, who gathers crime stats for the entire country, said that they were changing the way that they report crime, and
Mhm.
so the way that they were going to receive crime stats. And that took effect at the beginning of for the year of two for crime stats for 2021.
Yeah.
And so we're not going to talk about the 2021 crime stats because they are not very accurate,
Yeah.
because only about 65% of police agencies reported.
Yeah.
Well, that's nowhere near enough to really know. So we're going to be talking kind of what are the trends from about 1990 to 2020 is what we're going to
Mhm.
be talking about today. It's going to take a little while for this new reporting system to kick in and for everybody
Mhm.
to start being compliant with it. And until we get that, it it doesn't do us much good to
Yeah.
study those stats because they don't really mean anything until we're getting a majority reporting
Yeah.
it.
And the problem with that is that it has created some false narrative amongst some news stations
Mhm,
about crime in the US that has,
mhm,
created some pretty hysterical reporting
mhm.
and a lack of transparent reporting when it comes to what these stats really look like and mean.
Right.
And so be careful if you're hearing, various things about crime. Just be careful. Take it all
Mhm.
with a grain of salt when referring to crime rates in 2022 and 2021 because again it they're they're pretty skewed at this
They
point.
are. And you can go to your state's website. Also,
Mhm.
states report their own crime reporting as well. And I'm gonna share all my sources in the show notes, so you'll be able to go and see where I got this information,
Yeah.
because that's important. And I did get information from multiple sources because I also think that's important,
Mhm.
that we're not just reporting from one place. But it is very complicated to just say, well, is crime up or down? Well, crime is down in general from about 1990 on. The
Mhm.
crime rate, all in general, all of it. And you're talking about, you say crime. Well, what does that mean? There's violent crime, there's murder, there's property crime, there's financial crime. There's all these different crimes,
Yeah.
that sexual assault. That you really have to look at them individually. But in
Well, and
general,
missing persons that may or may
mis-
not be considered a crime.
right, right. How are things reported as a crime?
Yeah.
What is considered a crime? But from about 1990, when things had gotten really bad, there was a lot of criminal justice reform that happened in the early 90s. And we've seen a pretty consistent fall in crime in general since then. Although starting in 2020, we've seen a bit of a bump. And now we have to take into account COVID-19 and what
Mhm.
happened during lockdowns and how the pandemic has affected the crime rate because it
Yeah.
is fairly significant.
Oh,
So we're
yeah.
gonna get into all of that, but just know that the stats have a pretty significant plus or minus margin of error because not everybody reports and not everybody reports in the same way. And some things get inflated and some things get minimized.
Mhm.
One of the hardest stats to really get a clear picture on is police use of excessive force
Mhm.
because it is heavily underreported. Do
Yeah.
we really know what those rates are? No, we do
Not at
not.
all. No.
Mm-mm. Because they don't want to tell on themselves and they don't. So that is a
True.
tough one. We know from what we see publicly that it is still very much a problem.
Mhm.
However, is it worse or better?
Can't
S
say.
We can't
Yeah.
say for sure. I mean, I think you could look at a particular precinct and look at, and maybe get a little bit better picture, but
Mhm.
in general across the US, this is not something that we know. The very specific details like that, that is really hard information to get accurately.
Mhm.
So know that all of this is to be taken with a grain of salt. Consider
Mhm.
that there is a fairly significant plus or minus margin of error, and these are really more than anything trends, so much more than they are specific numbers.
Yeah.
We can see if things are trending up and down. So let's first talk about the murder solve rate in the US
Mm.
because this is significant. The murder solve rate is currently, or the murder clearance rate is at an all time low. We are just above 50%,
Yep.
which is um, not good.
Abysmal.
Right.
Abysmal.
Now, one problem we have is that gun murders are rising, and that is
Mhm.
in part due to school shootings and other mass shootings have increased gun murder by 43%. That's
Yeah.
a lot. The
In
highest
fact,
figure on
I
record
believe
is in 2020.
currently, yeah, I believe
Mhm.
currently the leading cause of death for children is gun violence.
It is. It is, which is unbelievable.
Mhm.
Now, we started recording, genuinely recording murder clearance rates in the 1960s.
Mhm.
Well, what's on paper is that 90% of all homicides were cleared by the police in the 1960s. Let's be clear about that. That is not true.
That couldn't be true.
Those
No.
are those numbers are inflated hugely. It was a common thing for police departments to report publicly that they were solving all of their murders. It was meant
Mhm.
to keep the public in a place of feeling safe and also just to make themselves look better. The murder clearance rate has continued to decline since the 1960s, but there's quite a bit more accountability for reporting. Also, we have the internet, and so
Mhm.
no one reports a 90% clearance rate these days
No.
at all. But genuinely, about half of the murders committed in the United States have gone unsolved.
Yeah.
Um, you know, there are a lot of other things to be taken into account here with the murder clearance rate. One is that um, maybe the suspect died, and so they consider that cleared.
Mhm.
It's very possible that that person did or did not commit the murder, but the main suspect may have died,
Yeah.
whether it was in a shootout with the police or a suicide or something else. But if that was who their prime suspect was, that can, be considered a cleared murder. There's also like our DNA for the win cases.
Mhm.
We prove it with DNA, but that person's already dead.
Yeah.
Or that person is in prison in another state for something else. Those are all considered cleared murders too, even though there was no actual prosecution.
Mhm.
So we have to be a little bit careful with that.
Mhm.
As always with this data, you always have to be careful.
Yeah.
But it does appear that we're seeing fewer and fewer murders clear every year.
Yeah.
And part of it is we really can't be sure about the old statistics.
Mhm.
Also, before Miranda, particularly, because people were arrested, charged, and convicted frequently for things they did not commit. They just
Right.
found a handy person. And that did improve the rights of a lot of people. And so it is harder to convict someone now than
Mhm.
it used to be. There's
Yeah.
a higher expectation now.
Mhm.
Um,
Which is important because as much as when you see somebody commit a crime or that, the news is saying committed the crime,
right.
on any given story on the internet, you'll see
Hmm.
tons of comments from people that, are just lock them up. Just throw away the key. And we've seen this with the Daybell case a lot. People are like, we're tired
Yeah.
of waiting. Just lock these monsters up. Just give them the chair right now or whatever.
Yeah.
If
Yeah.
that was you, if that was your family member, you would want all of your rights to be preserved. You would want your family members' rights to be preserved. And Miranda helped to create rights for everyone for those rights to be preserved. It's really, really important that we honor those rights, that we pay attention to those rights, that we insist that those rights are defended in every single case
Right.
for this very reason, because innocent people do get charged, innocent people do go to prison. And,
Innocent people do get executed.
yes, yeah.
And
And
those,
innocent people do, in our day and age, get absolutely destroyed in the media because, of the perception that they have committed a crime. So
right.
things like the Miranda rights are things that we need to, as citizens, be very clear about upholding and demanding that those things be upheld and respected.
Right. Very much so. Super, super important.
Yeah.
Another reason that experts believe that the murder solve rate has gone down in the 1960s, about 50% of murders were committed by guns.
Hmm.
Now it's 80%
Yeah.
of murders are committed by guns. And gun murders are harder to solve.
Hmm.
There's less forensic evidence. It can happen from farther away.
Hmm.
There are a lot of reasons why gun murders are actually more difficult to solve than,
Yeah.
say, a stabbing. There's going to be forensic evidence, lots
Hmm.
more of it.
Yeah.
Somebody is beat to death. Again, the forensic evidence, there's a lot more of it.
Hmm.
So the higher gun violence gets, the lower our clearance rate
Yeah.
gets.
Yeah.
Um, the bar is much higher now also, and we did just talk about this a little bit, but the expectation of proving in fact beyond a reasonable doubt that a murder was committed is harder now because of forensics, particularly DNA.
Hmm.
um, that's the expectation now. You want to see not just the person was in the area at the time, or they had a beef
Yeah.
with this person, or those kinds of things, but you want to see hard facts like DNA, fingerprints, all that kind of thing. And we don't always get those things.
Yeah.
That's not always a possibility, it's particularly in gun murders because they can happen from farther away, which
Yeah.
means there's less evidence there. But just
Uh-huh.
the standards are higher for conviction
Hmm.
than they used to be. It used to be. I mean, you think about like the Emmett Till case, and that was not a murder. Originally, it wasn't a murder case, but anyway, with Emmett Till, the woman that accused this young boy simply said he did it, that he, made her feel uncomfortable. And that was all it took those men to go kill him.
Yeah.
And she was never charged, even now, not charged.
Right. That
Now,
came
if
up
that
this year
this came up
again.
this year,
Yeah.
now, if somebody made an accusation like that and someone got killed, that's more likely to happen, but
Hmm.
they're more likely to be charged, but there's a much higher standard. One person's word is not enough, is
Right.
what I'm trying to say.
Yeah.
Is that also because just the populace, we are more educated.
Hmm.
We know more just as private citizens about forensics and
Hmm.
what we expect.
Hmm.
Another reason is racism.
Yeah.
You know, clearance rates for Black victims has gone down fairly significantly.
Yeah.
A white murder victim and a Black murder victim, the white murder victim is much more likely to get justice than the Black murder victim.
Hmm. Yeah.
And that does bear out in our statistics. And I don't care if you think that's true or not, it is.
Oh, I mean, yeah, well, we've been a broken record on this, but I look no further than the Gabby Petito case.
Right.
During the time that Gabby Petito was missing and Brian Laundrie was also missing, and that whole
Hmm.
saga played out in the
Yeah.
fall of 2021, there were so many other missing persons, and particularly people of color, that received no press, no interest, no
Right.
anything. There were the Moab murders that happened at that time. Now those women were white, but they were gay, and that also
Hmm.
uh, seems to receive less press.
Right.
There was the missing geologist in Arizona. There was another missing Chinese girl out on the desert in California, and so many
Hmm.
others that that we tried to pick up and give as much press to as we could because they got absolutely nothing while everyone was glued to Gabby Petito and
Right.
frankly still are.
Yeah.
Every time the Petito case is mentioned, people still come out of the woodwork for it. But
Right.
where are they?
We see that in our own numbers. If we
Oh,
cover
yeah.
something related to Gabby Petito or Brian Laundrie, that episode gets more watches or listens.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Well, and part of it also is that because of the racist behavior that has come out of the police departments, um, Black Americans are less likely to cooperate with police. LGBT Americans are less likely to cooperate with police for
Yep.
basically their own safety and protection, which means that those cases actually do get a lower clearance rate because the police have less to go on.
Yeah.
And I'm not blaming those communities for that at all because it's very much justified fear and suspicion and distrust that has been built on by police behavior.
Yeah.
But we do see that's another reason why the murder clearance rate is not as good
Hmm.
as it used to be. Technology also is helpful and it's hurtful. you know
Right.
yeah.
Yeah.
So it technology helps people commit crime,
Yeah.
also helps police solve it, but depending on the situation and the budget and the training in a police force, sometimes they are very much outsmarted by technology.
Yeah.
We see that here in Idaho, and you'll notice that a lot of the cases that we are covering here in the US right now, that well, are here in Idaho right now that are struggling, they've had to go to the FBI for help with
Hmm.
the technological side of things
Oh, yeah.
because that the money isn't there, the training isn't there within our little
The tech
tiny
isn't
police
there.
departments. Yeah, they don't
Yeah.
even have the resources. And so that it definitely here for us in Idaho and probably other rural states, we see that as being a hindrance too.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
So those are some of the reasons why the murder clearance rate is where it's at.
Yeah.
Um, just I think it's interesting. You would think over time that we would get better at solving murder.
Hmm.
But the thing is, those really old stats, we just can't trust them. They don't really mean anything
Yeah.
because at that time, people were just writing stuff down on paper without needing anything to back that or prove it.
Yeah.
And many, many, many people went to jail for things they did not do.
Right. And making the comparison doesn't really help us, but just looking just point blank at that stat that the
Mhm.
murder clearance rate is a little under 50% should be sobering enough. I
It
mean,
is. I find it really sobering.
oh, me
But we
too.
know that it's
That
true. I
also
mean, how many
says to
cases have we
criminals,
covered that
oh God,
never
so
go
many.
anywhere?
But that also says to criminals that if you commit a murder in this country, you have a 50% chance of getting away with it just
Right.
because.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and I mean, you throw in the missing persons cases where it's likely that the victim is dead and that it was a murder, but if we never even get past this
Hmm.
person is missing,
Yeah.
there's a whole other demographic
Hmm.
of crime victims there that I think get
Hmm.
kind of missed.
Yeah.
You
Oh,
think about
definitely.
like Dylan Rounds that we've covered,
Definitely.
who's from our area. He's missing out of southern Utah.
Oh, yeah.
And, I mean, that case has gone on a really, many, many months now and is starting to feel colder and colder by the day.
Yeah.
And, there is some evidence to believe that Dylan was in fact murdered, but they can't prove it. So he's not even a part of that statistic yet.
Yeah.
Missing persons, I think, is a whole like nebulous part of crime stats that we really cannot harness because we cannot even prove what happened to the person.
Right.
So really, is that
Hmm.
statistic even correct that our murder solve rate is around 50%? It's probably lower because
Hmm.
of missing persons whose bodies have never been
Yep.
found.
I also wonder if it's slower because of the amount of suicides
Right,
that are not a suicide at all, but are written off as a suicide when
right,
an actual crime has been committed.
right.
Because
And that's when we
unfortunately, we've seen a
way too
frightening
many of
amount of
those.
that as well.
Well, and that when you get into what the crime statistics are, particularly with Native Americans and with indigenous uh, reservations, like
Hmm.
that's a whole other. We'll have to do a whole show on just that because it's separate from this.
Yeah.
And there's a whole that issue there of things
Hmm.
that never even get determined to be
Right.
a murder. I will never stop saying the name Rebecca Plentywounds, who
Yep.
was murdered on a reservation here in Idaho, not very far from where we live.
Hmm.
Her family found her body dismembered.
Hmm.
Uh, her death has never even been classified as a murder.
Nope.
So you get into all of this, like the terminology. What
Hmm.
is something classified as? Because that is very important when it comes to what category does it fit into in crime stats.
Yeah.
You know, her death is not even counted as a murder
No.
because somehow your body being found dismembered doesn't qualify you as being murdered.
Yeah. Well, or
Which,
Ellen Greenberg.
yeah, yeah, Ellen Greenberg,
And that
who,
case has come up here again in 2022.
yeah,
Ellen died several years ago. She was stabbed, I believe, 22 times, mostly in the back of
yeah,
her
or
neck and
more
her back
in the back of
and
her head.
back of her head, and her death was ruled a suicide. And her parents have been fighting the justice system for years, and finally this year
Hmm.
forced them to reclassify her death as a homicide and start looking at it a different way, because if the ME says this is that this is the cause of death, that is what the police have to base their investigation on.
Right,
So if the ME says it's a suicide, the case is closed. They don't
right.
get to just keep investigating it.
No.
That means it's done. And in Ellen Greenberg's case, the ME said that these were self-inflicted wounds. Her family has proved repeatedly through multiple experts that there is no possible way Ellen could have done these things to herself.
Right,
Uh, a- and reasonably looking at this case, there's no possible way Ellen could have done these things to herself.
right.
But it has taken them years
Yeah,
and hundreds of thousands of dollars to get a new look at this case.
right,
It's insanity. But
right.
we've seen that a lot in a lot of families who they don't have those resources. They don't
Right.
have the wherewithal, and they also are so swallowed up by life and grief that they can't even fight the system.
Right.
And so that happens, and that also skews the numbers
Right.
and also
Right.
lets murderers go free.
Yes, it does. It does. But that's why, all of these stats, we have to consider
Mhm.
the plus or minus margin of error on these, because how many cases are there like Rebecca Plenty Wounds and Ellen Greenberg? I mean,
Oh.
many, many,
Mhm.
many. We've uncovered many just on our little podcast.
Mhm.
So those are all things to keep in mind. But let's talk a little bit about um, first I want to talk about some population facts, because I think this is important to understand a little bit of who what is the population makeup of the United States when it comes to um, race, because it matters when it comes to what the stats are. So, in the 2020 census, the non-Hispanic white population in the U.S. fell below 60%.
Mhm.
The non-Hispanic white population is on a downturn that it may, by the next census, it is possible that whites will not be the majority of
Uh-huh.
U.S. citizens.
Mhm.
That partially is because until COVID-19, our death rate was down, but so was our birth rate. So we're seeing people are living longer, but at the same time, our birth rate isn't, we're not replenishing ourselves like we used to.
Mhm.
And then COVID-19 happened, and we had our death rate jumped because way more people died than would normally die in a year because of the um, pandemic.
Mhm.
So things are changing quite a bit when it comes to what is the population makeup of the US.
Yeah.
So let's see. I want to tell you what our composition is as of the 2020 census. We were at 59.72% white non-Hispanic, 18.61% Hispanic, 12.5% Black non-Hispanic. Those two numbers are going to become really important in a minute.
Mhm.
So we have 18% Hispanic, 12% Black. Be aware of that. Asian non-Hispanic is 5.88. People of two or more races is 2.29%. And American Indian, Alaska Native is 0.74%. Okay. One thing that we find in the criminal justice system is that all of the groups that are not white, all of the groups of color well, except Asians, I think, are overrepresented in our prisons and overrepresented
Oh,
in
yeah.
crime in general.
Mhm.
So let's just give some basic facts in 2020. In 2020, more than 5.6 million Americans were in prison, jail, or under probation or parole. This is actually a decrease of 13% from 2019. The total prison population decreased 25% between 2009 and 2020. And a lot of that is due to the decriminalization of marijuana.
Mhm.
Um, Arrests per 100,000 people in 2020 had their largest yearly decline in 35 years. But that's a false number. If you don't know, um, lots of police departments during the pandemic changed their policies, and some states even changed their laws. Idaho did,
Mhm.
about who can be arrested, to try
Mhm.
to have fewer people in jails, to try to reduce exposure to police officers. Idaho stopped arresting people for misdemeanors.
Mhm.
Now, if you get a misdemeanor in Idaho, you get a ticket and a court date.
Yeah.
You are not arrested for a misdemeanor, not even domestic violence or child abuse,
Yeah.
which is really scary. So,
Mhm.
although that looks like a big decline, it's really a false decline that came about because of the pandemic. And
Yeah.
lots of other agencies did the same thing. They didn't necessarily change their laws like Idaho did, but they
Mhm.
had a policy of, it was
Mhm.
just like, kind of, here it was called a catch and release program, which I think is gross as hell
Mhm.
to refer to human beings like that.
Yeah.
Um, But that's what they did, is they would, if they caught somebody doing something, or where something was reported, if it wasn't a felony, they didn't arrest them. And
Yeah.
so those stats have changed, look like there's a huge decline.
Yeah.
Violent crime rose 5.6% between 2019 and 2020, while property crime decreased 7.8%. Again, think about the pandemic. Property crime decreased because we were locked down, or lots
Yeah.
of people were. We weren't, but violent crime did increase. People were home with their families more. We saw more domestic violence. We saw more child abuse, and just in general, more violent crime.
Mm-hmm.
The number of police officers has fallen per capita 5.9% between 2009, which was when it was at its peak, to 2020. So we actually have fewer police officers in general.
Mm-hmm.
Firearm deaths increased 43% from 2010 to 2020.
Yeah.
Now accounting for 1.3% of all deaths in 2020.
Yeah.
That's where the stats get scary.
Yeah.
Now, the prison population decrease is interesting, because that's a across the nation statistic, and it is not true in all states.
Right.
It is not true in the Northwest. Montana, North Dakota, Iowa, Wyoming, South Dakota, and Idaho, we all increased our prison population, as did Arizona, Kansas, Arkansas, and West Virginia. But you can see, you start comparing states that have legalized recreational marijuana and these stats, and the states that are still having an increase in their prison population are the states that have not legalized recreational marijuana.
Yep.
So these are mostly simple drug charges that are not happening at the rate that they used to.
Yep.
In 2020, the proportion of the prison population that was Black or Hispanic decreased from 58% to 55%, while the proportion of the nation's Black or Hispanic population rose from 28 to 31%. But remember that they only make up 18% and 12% of the U.S. population, and yet Black and Hispanic people make up, even now, 55% of the prison population. Very heavily overrepresented. And whites are underrepresented. It should track with what our population stats breakdown is. So if about 12% of the population is Black, then about 12% of the prison population should be Black. So it should be somewhere in there. Same with the Hispanic population. U.S., whites, we're at just under 60%. Well, that's how many of white, it should stay about the same, right?
Yeah.
It doesn't. And some people use that to say that that's because Blacks and Hispanics are more violent, and that is not true. Blacks and Hispanics are more likely to be arrested, charged, and convicted than whites are.
Yeah.
We all know that to be true. I mean, if you want to argue with me about that, please save your breath. Really. I'll make you sorry. You won't like it.
Please save your breath.
Well, I mean, come on. Of course, so the, burglaries decreased during the pandemic. Well, yeah, for a lot of reasons.
We were home.
People were home. Businesses were closed. Also, stimulus checks and unemployment helped with that as well. People were a little less poor because property crimes are usually crimes committed more by people in poverty than not, because they're literally just survival crimes in a lot of cases. Not all, but let's see. So we have reduced the number of police officers slightly. And that, whenever you get into the stats about police agencies, this is very non-helpful information, really, because there is such a huge difference between, say, the police department here in Idaho Falls, Idaho, and the police department in New York City.
Yeah.
You know, the budgets, the education required, the number of officers, all of it is so vastly different that
Mhm.
I don't think that those kind of statistics are very helpful to us unless they are broken down into rural, small city, rural county, rural state police versus highly populated states.
Yeah.
And it doesn't help because
Mhm.
there's such a vast difference in resources
Yeah.
between those two places. And yes, there's a vast difference in population, but we were just talking last week, I think, about Clark County, Idaho, which is a very rural agricultural county. Their sheriff, a deputy, and a dispatcher all quit. And the
Yeah.
sheriff said that he had had enough trying desperately to adequately police his county with zero money and
Mhm.
very small personnel, and he just couldn't do it anymore.
Mhm.
And we see that in Idaho all the time.
And he took a job as a deputy.
Yeah, he
I mean,
did in
he
another
took a
county.
job as a deputy in another county and said he would make significantly more money as a deputy in this other county
Yeah,
versus the sheriff in the county he was in.
yeah,
That's
yeah.
insanity.
So rural police departments, vastly understaffed, vastly underfunded. And then you look at, New York City or LA or
Mhm.
Chicago, and then you start seeing like really bloated police
Yeah.
departments that spend an ungodly amount of money and have all of the military gear you can possibly imagine and all that stuff.
Mhm.
You cannot compare those kinds of departments to one another because they're just not the same thing at all.
Not at all. Well, and these police commissioners that are, eh, like second only to mayors with power in their cities and things that are,
Yes.
uh, you know, can be a cause of crime, unfortunately,
With
and
these million and
corruption
mil
and
hundreds of millions of dollars type
budgets
budgets,
and
and
yeah.
yeah, it's we need much better reporting when it comes to those kinds of things,
Mhm.
and if you go look at the city that you live in or the county or the state, you can get some of those stats. How accurate and honest are they? That's a good question because
Mhm.
that is always a question. All of this, you have to consider that there is some dishonesty in all of this reporting.
Certainly. Yeah.
Let's see. The use of force data is very limited and delayed. We don't get a lot of it. Um, Only 41% of federal, state, and local and tribal law enforcement agencies even reported their use of force data to the
Yeah.
FBI in 2021, which represents only 54% of officers nationwide. So,
Mhm.
can we possibly know what those numbers are? No. At this point, that the answer is no. We don't know.
Mm.
Firearm deaths. This is a huge one. We know it, but to hear the statistics is terrifying. Firearm deaths increased 43% from 2010 to 2020. It now accounts for 1.3% of all deaths in this country, and we are at almost 400 million people in this country. 1.3% of all the deaths in the US are caused by firearm deaths.
Yeah.
54% are reported as suicides.
Yeah.
Now, again, we get into reporting, and there's an issue here, and there's
Yeah.
also an issue of the way that a case is closed, if it genuinely is a suicide or if it is a murder. Those numbers, I think, have a lot of play. There's a lot
Yeah.
of leeway there because of how things are misreported. Here, where we live, suicide is heavily underreported, and that has been studied. One of my
Mhm.
sociology professors in college actually has done a bunch of study on that. Suicide is heavily underreported here. And if it's guns, it's going to be an accident while cleaning a gun.
Yep.
If it's a single car accident that is
Mhm.
that's reported as a car accident when it was pretty clearly an intentional
Mhm.
act. So there's a lot of question around things like that. And it comes the culture in every community, in every state comes into play there. Like people would much rather hear because of the religious affiliations here, would much rather see someone reported as an accident. And I think that may
Yeah.
be true across the board, really. And that there is some actual, like, intentional action to,
Mhm.
to write on a death certificate that this is an accidental death when it
Oh,
clearly wasn't.
absolutely. It's out of respect for the family.
Yeah.
There was a case here many years ago where a home exploded in the night.
Yes.
Exploded. And uh, a married couple and their young child were killed. And it was immediately written off as an accident that their maybe their
Gas leak
natural
or
gas system failed or something. Just written off. They were buried very quickly, and that it was just that.
yeah,
But the wife, her family didn't believe that. They didn't feel like the fireball in the sky could have possibly been caused by what the cause of death was being called, and they disclosed that there had been a fair amount of domestic violence in this home, and really, really forced the issue. And at the time, the police had said, out of respect for the families, literally, this is what we're doing. That it was just an accident. Well, as it turned out, it wasn't.
no,
It was a double murder suicide.
yeah,
And that was finally determined after the case was actually investigated because of her family's pushing for it, the bodies being exhumed and bullet holes being found, and an actual investigation into what happened. But they were very quick and fast to write it off because partly the police had said it was because of the out of respect for the families, uh, to not solve their crimes, but also because of the prominence of some of the families in the area, that they didn't want to cause pain and embarrassment to them.
yeah,
And we've never fully covered this case because we actually are friends with these families, and haven't
yeah,
ever really wanted to bring those things to the forefront either.
right,
Actually, however, that's not our job. That's the police's job to do
right,
their job.
right,
But that's always been one that really amazed me.
yeah,
That that happened, and that then after they actually investigated, that they so freely admitted that, well, we just did it this way out of respect for the families.
yeah.
Yeah.
How many other cases does that happen to
Yeah.
across this country that then we never really know the truth of anything?
Mhm.
A lot of questions.
Mhm.
I want to just give you a little bit of a breakdown of who is currently in prison and what they are in prison for, because
Yeah.
this is why I gave you the statistics. Um, White people are about 60% of the population. Hispanics are 18%, blacks are 12%, Asians were 5%. So let's talk a little bit about this. So who is currently in prison? So 33% of prisoners right now in prison in the US, well, or in 2020, were black. 33%, even though they're
Yeah.
only 12% of the population. 32% of prisoners are white, even though they're about 60% of the population. Uh, 22% of Hispanics make up the prison population, even though there's only about 18% of the population is Hispanic. And then all other races make up 14%. So, um, black prisoners that have been convicted of murder are about 16%. Um, White prisoners that were convicted of murder is about 10%. And 13% of Hispanic prisoners that are committed murder
Mhm.
were, and then about 15% were all other races.
Mhm.
Let's get to some of the ones that might surprise you but shouldn't. 17% of prisoners in prison right now committed rape who are white. Now, we are taught regularly, or people say, that black men commit rape. No, it's white. Hispanic men make up about 16%, and 14% are all other races.
Mhm.
But there are way more white people in prison for rape than anybody else.
Yeah.
Robbery. Robbery crimes, 19% of Black prisoners committed a robbery crime. You have to remember that that's a poverty crime. About 6.7% of white prisoners committed robbery. Big difference in socioeconomic status, right?
Yeah.
Robbery in the Hispanic population, 12% of Hispanic prisoners committed robbery. You got to think about like what socioeconomically,
Mhm.
property crimes are the same. Generally, they are poverty crimes.
Mhm.
12% of Black prisoners were committed property crimes. 20% of white prisoners committed property crimes. 10% of Hispanic prisoners committed property crimes, and 18% of um, all other races committed property crimes. Drug crimes.
Mhm.
17% of white prisoners committed drug crimes. 12% of Black prisoners, 12% of Hispanic, and 16% of other races. So this is very interesting, and it kind of takes a little while to think about it and process it. But this will
It
be in
definitely
the show
challenges
notes.
stereotypes.
It challenges stereotypes a lot,
Yeah.
and I think that's important. But we also have to remember, how accurate are these convictions,
Right.
and how many white people were accused of something like that
Yeah.
didn't get charged and convicted.
Yeah.
There's a lot of questions, but it is important to look at those numbers. Those numbers really matter because racism plays into those things, and there are a lot of misconceptions that Black men are the most violent. Well, even just with who's in prison, that is not true.
Mhm.
It's white, and white white people should always be, just statistically, there should always be more white people in prison for every single crime,
Mhm.
because white people are twice the population.
Mhm.
Anyway, not twice the population, but we're 60, it's 60-40, basically, white people
Right.
versus everybody else. So
Right.
there should be more white people in prison for all of those crimes because there are more white people. So
Mhm.
when you start seeing those variances, you do have to really question, like, how much does racism come into play with these things?
Right. And socioeconomic status,
Yes,
because they both
definitely.
do. I mean,
That's
in the
really important.
yeah, in respect for the study of generational poverty and, like you said, poverty
Mhm.
crimes, we do see more of those crimes committed by races that have less socioeconomic opportunity.
Right.
And
Well, drug crimes are the same way,
oh yeah,
very
yeah.
much.
Mhm.
The burglary, property crimes, and drugs,
Mhm.
those are poverty crimes.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I'm going to leave it there because we could literally go on for hours. There's so much information, but I felt like it was important for us to have this conversation, kind of do a big overview, and then share with you in the show notes all of our links where this information came from so that you can go and take a look at it. What I did is I've used some sites that break it down, that's a little more palatable for the general populace, because reading statistics is hard, and I studied it in college and I am not good at it. So, these are not the actual crime stats, because if you want to go look at them, go ahead, and your mind will absolutely spin for hours. So these are websites who break things down so it's a little easier to understand. But it's
Mhm.
all in the show notes. Go take a look. Go see what your state is doing.
Yeah.
But it's important. We need to understand what's going on with crime. Is it getting better? Is it getting worse? And why?
Mhm.
Why?
Yeah.
Well, this is our Monday episode, our last Monday of season 3. We will
Yes.
be back on Tuesday and Wednesday with new episodes. And we'll be back Wednesday night for case updates, our live stream at 7 p.m.
Mhm.
And then following case updates, we will also have the true crime cold read party for those of you who are members on our YouTube channel.
Mhm.
So
Yep.
we have a lot coming up this week.
We also have one brand new Patreon out, and by the end of
Yes.
this week, we'll have a second one.
Yes, we will. So there's lots to come. So don't forget to like,
Also,
subscribe, and share.
don't miss Wednesday's episode this week. I promise you will enjoy it immensely.
We're going to go out with a bang and a laugh. So
Mhm.
that's the way we want to end this year.
Yeah.
Well, you know it. We are the True Crime Squad. Thanks for being here.
Take care.